Hello, friends. Happy New Year. Now I will leave this place like Santa Claus. I will use the fireplace. One of the best things about working overnight at the hotel was the abundance of entertaining nightlife. The late hours brought in all kinds of folks, from drunken travelers to drug dealers, prostitutes, and cheating lovers. And every so often, a homeless person, especially during the colder months. Since I was the one that usually ended up working most overnight shifts, I would welcome the homeless folks to warm up in the lobby for a while. I would bring them hot chocolate, let them watch TV and use the internet, and would often sit and chat if I wasn't busy with paperwork. Eventually, I had convinced my boss to let me provide a room for the occasional homeless person who came through. "You know how those people are," he had said, and we simultaneously repeated his mantra. "You give an inch, they take a mile." I had argued that the hotel was never fully booked up and that we always had plenty of other available rooms for potential paying customers. The occasional homeless guy staying for one night in a warm bed wasn't going to hurt anybody. When he finally gave in, I guaranteed that I would use discretion as far as what I would allow, and promised to have the rooms clean before housekeeping arrived in the morning. "You know that no good can come out of this, right?" my boss had sighed. "They'll start to tell all their friends that little Miss Free Handouts works up at this hotel. Soon enough this place will be crawling with toothless freeloaders." I shrugged. "I won't let it get to that point," I said, promising again to use my best judgment. My boss made a joke about me being overly sympathetic and too good for this world, then chuckled and gave me a pat on the back. So that was it. I kept my promise and made sure the situation stayed very low-key. I asked each homeless guest to be quiet and courteous, and to leave by 6:30 a.m., which gave them enough time to stop by the breakfast bar and grab some food before they left. I made sure that the sheets were replaced and that the room was deep cleaned after every stay. My secret profitless business was running smoothly. Until the night before New Year's Eve. I was mindlessly picking at my fingernails, waiting for the last few scheduled guests to filter in. The lobby TV was quietly humming a jazzy jingle while reeling through weather predictions for the upcoming day, snow, and lots of it. Temperatures had plunged below zero, and a thick layer of snow had already built up on the main road outside. I hadn't noticed any cars go by in over an hour, so I assumed the remaining reservations were going to be no-shows. As I went to delete the no-shows from the system and prepare for my nightly audit, the lobby door swooshed open. The sudden noise startled me, as I had been sort of lost in my thoughts. "Just in time," I joked, still focused on the computer. I assumed nobody else was. I stopped short as I fixed my eyes on the woman in front of me. She was older, very pale, and had a thin, wrinkly face that resembled a melting candle. She was wearing a heavy jacket that was zipped all the way up to her chin. On her head was a fraying knit hat with snowflakes clinging to the woolly material, and scraggly strands of grey hair poking out from underneath. She had an overwhelming stench, like rotten eggs, and had bits of dirt caked into her pores. The thing that really took me back a bit were her eyes. They were completely cloudy and grey as if she were blind, but I could feel her staring right at me. Her gaze was almost lifeless, practically sending a shiver down my spine. Feeling rude for gawking, I apologized and said I was expecting somebody else. She didn't say anything, didn't even blink. I chuckled uncomfortably and asked if she had a reservation. Again, nothing, just that soulless stare that seemed to go right through me. The old woman's appearance, and that unmistakable stench told me that she was homeless, probably seeking shelter from the raging snowstorm outside. A lot of the homeless passerby were exceptionally bizarre people, so I had pretty much chalked up the old woman to be just that. "Do you need a room?" I asked quietly. I wasn't quite sure what else to say. The old woman nodded slowly, her first actual acknowledgement of me. I felt my body relax a bit. I asked her to take a seat in the lobby and told her I would get a room ready for her, but she wordlessly refused to sit down. She kept her eyes locked onto mine. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a little crumpled up piece of paper. She placed it on the desk and slid it toward me. My eyebrows raised in confusion. Was she mute, and handing me a note explaining why she wasn't speaking or something? My brain reeled over the possibilities, but as I unfolded the little paper, I felt my stomach drop. They're watching me. I blinked and stuttered in confusion. I just kept reading the note, over and over, those three absolutely bone-chilling words. My breath had stopped, my heart was racing. I had no idea what was going on. Wordlessly I handed the note back to the old woman. She hadn't broken her gaze, her cloudy grey eyes still fixated on mine. I instinctively wanted to glance over to the window and scan my surroundings, but I was too afraid to look away. I felt frozen in place. Who were they? Were they watching right now? Was this all a prank? Was she crazy? The printer whirred and snapped me back to reality. I leaned in closer to the old woman. "Are you safe?" I whispered. She shook her head, and I clenched my jaw a bit. "Do you need me to call the police?" She shook her head again. "Is someone looking for you?" The old woman turned her head to the sliding glass double doors that led outside. Her empty eyes seemed to be scanning the parking lot. I hesitantly followed her gaze and looked outside as well, noticing nothing but her footprints in the snow leading up to the double doors. Her eyes returned to me and she held out her hand, palm up. "Is someone after you?" I repeated. She pushed her open hand closer to me, a gesture that I assumed was her way of demanding her room key. I obeyed. As I programmed the room key, I explained my rules to her and promised there would be no more questions asked. "This is a key to room number 103, I explained. "The door is right around the corner, so if you need me, just dial 0 on the phone and I'll be there ASAP." "Okay." The woman nodded. She held the room key close to her chest and sauntered around the corner. I held my breath until I heard her door latch closed, then let out a huge sigh and allowed my body to untense. What the hell had just happened? I had seen quite a few crazy homeless people but had never had an interaction quite as creepy. I started to worry about whether or not the decision to let her stay was a good idea. But she had seemed afraid of something or somebody. My eyes nervously shifted back to the lobby door. It was a hotel rule that we had to leave it unlocked at all hours, but I was considering locking it out of sheer paranoia. If somebody really was coming for this woman, I had no way of knowing if they were dangerous, or what they even wanted in the first place. It didn't take long for me to convince myself to lock the doors. I shuffled across the lobby and nearly threw myself at the door in an attempt to lock it as quickly as possible. The latch clicked shut, and I let out a sigh, running my fingers along the cool glass of the door. Was I just being spooked over nothing? My chain of thought was immediately broken as I noticed three dark shadows standing across the parking lot. The falling snow made it hard to see clearly, but the street lamp above was able to shed some light on what resembled three people facing the building. I frantically waved my arms out the front door, assuming it was a group of late arrivals. "Hey!" I yelled. "Doors open." Then I noticed something really odd. There were no cars to accompany them and no tire tracks in the snow. They just stood there by the dim light of the street lamp. Typically the homeless guests that come through on foot travel alone. So this group of travelers seemed exceptionally strange. I went with my gut and latched the lock on the front door as quickly as I could. My heart was racing as I dove behind the front desk and frantically fumbled for my cell phone. With shaking fingers I dialed my boyfriend's phone number. I had decided against calling the police because technically there was no emergency. I just needed to make sense of everything. The phone line purred twice before he answered. "Hey," he mumbled. "Henry," I breathed, "something really weird is going on and I don't know if I'm being totally crazy or not." "You sound scared," Henry said. I could hear the concern in his voice. He hated the fact that I worked the overnight shift, especially since I was the only employee in the entire hotel. "Yeah, I'm a little scared. But I think I'm doing it to myself." "Do you need me to come down there?" "No." "Can you tell me what happened?" I recapped the old woman, the note, the 3 people that were currently standing outside the hotel. Henry was quiet for a few seconds before responding. He asked about the figures in the parking lot. "I dunno." I gripped the phone tightly in my hand. "Should I check and see if they're still there?" Henry told me to just take a peek and had to encourage me to look up from my hiding place. To my surprise, the shadows in the parking lot had vanished. Now the umbrella of light from the street lamp only illuminated the falling snow. I almost felt relieved, until I immediately noticed something odd, a second set of footprints in the snow, leading up to the front door. I lifted my head a bit to get a better view and was able to confirm that there were, in fact, 2 sets of tracks by the front door. One continued inside, and turned to small watery puddles on the lobby floor, from the old woman coming in. The other stopped, right at the front door, 2 feet standing side by side. And the trail did not turn around and continue the other way. I double-checked the door to make sure it was still locked. I told Henry the first felt like I was going crazy. He said he was bundling up to head over to the hotel and would be there soon, and told me to keep the doors locked until he got there. "If things get any weirder, will you at least call the non-emergency police number?" he asked, and I agreed. His discomfort worried me a bit. "Yeah, just drive safe," I whimpered, "but please get here as soon as you can." About 30 minutes later, I was startled by a sudden blood-curdling wail. My heart leapt and I jumped from my seat, causing my paperwork to scatter all over the floor. I held my breath and listened intently for a moment before another scream echoed through the halls. The noise had come from the first floor, more specifically from room number 103, the room that the homeless old woman was staying in. I hesitated, remembering how creepy she was, and was shaken once again by the front desk phone suddenly ringing. I gasped out loud. My shaky hands picked up the phone, only to answer a noise complaint from the guest that was staying in the room next to the old woman. I apologized and said that I was going to investigate, but the guest interrupted me with a huffy explanation of how he had to wake up early, before abruptly ending the call. I took a deep breath. The complaint call was almost comforting. In a weird way, it reminded me that there were still other people in the building and that I was probably just being jumpy for no reason. My heart rate started to settle as I made my way towards room 103. I knocked loudly and waited. Nothing. Knocked again, louder. Nothing. "Mom?" Are you okay in there? Nothing. After standing at the door for a moment, dumbfounded, I gathered my wits and assumed it was a medical emergency. I fumbled for my master key and slid it through the card scanner, unlocking the door with a click. As I reached for the doorknob, my brain reeled over the possibilities of what I would find behind that door. My mind was intruded by gruesome images of the old woman's lifeless body sprawled out on the floor, her stone-cold eyes still staring at me. I shook off the thought and slowly cracked the door, barely peeking inside the room. I was honestly scared of what I might see. "Mom?" I called shakily as I pushed the door open a bit more. I could see that the lights had been turned off. I cursed under my breath, of fucking course. I slipped my arm through the crack in the door and felt around for the light switch. Half expecting them to not cut on like they tend to do in the horror movies, I ended up giving myself a fright when the lights did flip on. "Get your shit together," I thought to myself, shaking my head, feeling sort of silly about how spooked I was. But how could I not be? The whole night had just been weird. I thought about the note, those 3 gut-wrenching words, the figures outside in the snow, the footprints, the screams. I pushed the door all the way open, quickly, like ripping a band-aid off. What I saw in the room made me stop in my tracks. Nothing. The bed hadn't been touched. The comforter was still neatly folded over, the pillows set perfectly in place. The TV had not been turned on, the remote still resting on the nightstand. It was as if nobody had even been in the room. My jaw clenched. This night was somehow getting unfathomably weirder. I scanned the room for any signs of the old woman. She couldn't have just disappeared. I had just heard her screaming. I poked my head in the bathroom, nothing. I opened up the closet, nothing. Then something caught my eye. I almost had to do a double take because I didn't quite believe my eyes at first. It was another note, sitting on the desk, the only trace of evidence I could find. I tiptoed over to the small scrap of paper. "They're watching you." At this point, I was so scared that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. My throat was closing up like I was about to cry. My heart was racing. What is the absolute fuck was going on? I stood frozen in place for a moment before sprinting back to the front desk. I needed Henry to get here. I needed him to make me feel protected, to make sense of everything. I was so blinded by fear that I couldn't think straight. I swiped my phone off the desk, so I could call Henry to see how close he was to the hotel. As I unlocked my phone, I saw that I had a text message notification from him. Had he arrived? Was he waiting outside? I glanced out the double doors to see if I could spot his car. And Henry was there. He was standing in the footprints that I had seen earlier, the ones that ended right at the door and didn't turn back. It was Henry. But his eyes had been gouged out. There was so much blood that his face was hardly recognizable. I couldn't even tell if he was dead or alive. My vision was fading. I felt like I was going to throw up. I was so numb. I could barely lift my phone in front of my face to call the police. I blinked hard. The text message from Henry was up on the screen, slowly revealing itself in my blurry field of vision. "We're watching you."